Hello and welcome to the Hyundai IONIQ 6. I have conveniently parked it and filmed it from this direction so you don't have to look at the rear end of this thing. But we're going to be doing a full build quality analysis on this. This vehicle, of course, sits on the EGMP platform. Very anxious to get my hands in and on this car, seeing and feeling how things are put together. We have seen the Kia EV6 GT in here. Very high regards for that car, how everything was put together. Very, very precise, really nice interior materials. So let's first start off talking about exterior fit and finish and then jump inside. So welcome back to another out of spec detailing video here from Clear Detailing. Let's jump into it. Well, you join me at the probably most controversial part of the IONIQ 6. And man, I gotta say, this is not one of those cars that I really expected to feel this way in person. This thing just looks hideous to me from the rear end especially. I really expected this car to be one of those that you see online and you look at photos and you're like, God, I really don't understand it. But you see it in person, you're like, ah, that makes sense. Huge moment, I understand it. I really think this rear end just really is not an attractive car, but nonetheless, let's jump into the build quality. Before we do, I have my friend and colleague Max that runs our out of spec guide channel. He's going to run us through the trim of this and most importantly pricing to kind of figure out where this car sits in the EV market.
Yeah, so this car, I think when it came out, was initially meant to compete between a Tesla Model 3 and a Polestar 2. But because we've seen the Tesla Model 3 price cuts, what we're looking at is a range for this that's been unchanged since launch, $41,000 base, but that base model has a small battery. I don't think most people will want it because it really is also like a 9-second 0 to 60, and that's a lot of money to spend on a vehicle like that. This one we're looking at is the Mac Daddy, nicest one, dual motor, all-wheel drive, limited trim. There's 3 trim options, SE, SEL, and limited. So it's the nicest one with all-wheel drive, so as expensive as it gets, 57-ish grand. Wow. So 57, 58 grand with destination. That's a lot of money, not obviously quite Mercedes EQE money, but more money than anyone's paying for a Model 3 right now. Like the nicest performance is going to be right about there. Yep. And, you know, whoop this in numbers. But yeah, it's a little more expensive than that. And it's similar to the Polestar 2. If you get a dual motor Polestar 2, then it's more expensive than any of these.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think that's always the interesting part that a lot of people initially look at is the on-paper stuff. When you compare pretty much anything to a Tesla right now, it's like on paper, Tesla just crushes it. Now, I think what changes that is when you get to the car and start feeling it and looking at it and materials and things like that. And that's how they can really differentiate these cars. We all know EGMP cars charge like absolute monsters. That's one of those areas on paper, they absolutely crush something like the Model 3 Performance over here. Also in range, this thing, you really get the idea that they care about efficiency. They care about charging. They understand the EV-ness of the car, but man, aesthetically, this car to me just looks wild. I just can't even explain it. I know Max is a huge fan of this car, and I do understand it in ways. It's like, okay, so this is a very aero-focused car. That's why you have this really wild sculpture on the back, but I just couldn't drive one of these all day long. Like, I'm sorry, to me, subjectively, Model 3 just looks way better. That's just my personal opinion. Of course, everybody's gonna have their own opinions, but nonetheless, let's start talking build quality. Now, this is only the second EGMP car we've had in here. So we've had Kia EV6 GT. Blown away with that car. Interior was incredible. Exterior was incredible. Is this thing gonna be the same? I'm not exactly sure, but let's start here on probably the most controversial area. So this is a pretty wild spoiler here, of course, for aero. Now, just looking at it, very plasticky feeling. Of course, you can see all these pixels in here. I just want to note something because I kind of leaned on this. I don't know if you can hear all of that plastic crunchiness. That immediately does not scream premium whatsoever. But I will say all of the gapping around here looks very nice here to the window. That's how it should look, looking really, really good. Here on the rear end, love the Hyundai logo here. Looks like it's machined out of a piece of aluminum. Very flush, very flat. Of course, we have the matte paint here looking really, really nice. A really nice integrated spoiler here. I think my favorite part of this car, actually, Max, is like this part. I think this looks really cool in between here. Nice spoiler, incredible taillight. This thing definitely at night is completely striking. I love the single individual pixels. Basically, this is Hyundai's electric language, design language, you will. And yeah, I think it's cool. I like how they carry over, put it in certain areas, of course, like you can see up here, very pixely, down here, very pixely. Speaking of even more pixels, you press this one and the rear trunk opens up. Now, I gotta say, very, very surprised at the space back here. Just looking at this, you would not think this is a large trunk. And I would say, okay, it's very wide, it's very deep, but it's not deep this way. So opening up this flap down here, very shallow and narrow here, can fit some charging cables here. I think that's completely adequate. Of course, Model 3 definitely has a lot more space down low, but I'm not sure it's as deep and I'm not sure it's as wide. So I think they've done a pretty stellar job here. Closing this down, let's see how the actuation is. Nice mechanical sound. Completely normal, but let's really get into the shut lines here. So just starting around here on the trunk, all of this, look how perfectly lined up all this is. Very, very happy to see that. Max, I'm gonna flip around behind you here. All of this looks absolutely perfect, gapping side to side, exactly how it should be. A very, very wild rear end here, of course. Now we've got all of these aero vents and scoops and horizontal lines with vertical lines. It's a lot of design language going on here. Max, I haven't even noticed this. Do these light up as a rear fog light?
I believe they are, yeah. And I like how they integrate them into the diffuser. They're, of course, also those individual pixel LEDs.
Wow, that's pretty wild. And again, just looking at this design language, like this is not just here for aesthetics. This is doing some sort of aero function here.
Yeah, all the aero, I agree with you, Coleton, looks very functional, and numbers it bears out. EPA rating is 361 miles. If you get this with the absolute range trim, which would be long range rear wheel drive, this is the dual motor, so it's 316. I will tell you from my time driving it, it's very easy for me to get above 4 miles a kilowatt hour.
Wow.
Driving it, even at highway speed, it's really efficient.
Wow, that's impressive for sure. So I definitely think they're doing something with the sculpture here. I know IONIQ 5 is, I believe, quite substantially less than that. Don't remember the exact numbers, but you definitely get the idea that they are really sculpting this car. They've spent time, done their research, getting that coefficient of drag really low. But yeah, really interesting stuff going on here. So this trunk is pretty wild. Like, what a massive piece this essentially is, and how perfectly they lined all of this up. My Model 3 over here, completely different story. Of course, the trunks have always been a massive issue on these cars. If you are interested in a full build quality analysis on this exact car, I'll leave it in the link below, but this looks substantially better. And Max, one thing that I'm very surprised about, I gotta say, this is one of my favorite charge port doors. So opening it up here, popping this pixel open, that sound, it sounds so nice, absolutely perfect, very precise. What's weird here is how deep the charge port is. I know Kyle was a little concerned about this with larger cables getting this in here. It's also at kind of an angle. I don't know if you've charged this much, but that could be interesting at some point, I would definitely say. Now we've of course got the cheap old plastic things. I absolutely hate these. Do what Rivian does, do what Mercedes does. Actually, BMW is the king of this, I believe, how they have the little flaps here. So much better than all of these very cheap, plasticky, terrible things. You have your pixel indicator here of the state of charge. Oh, that's so satisfying. That noise there, that feels extremely, extremely nice. So very, very glad to see that. Let's continue moving down the side of the car. So interesting stuff going on here, especially. Not a full sunroof. Now, Max initially said, okay, I think this could be a large negative, especially to its competitors. Polestar has full glass roof. Tesla has kind of this interesting segmented glass roof where you have glass roof here, a center section, and then full rear glass. Interesting design choices there. The nice benefit with this though is you can actually open it. Model 3, you can't open any of the sunroof. I do get a lot more sense of openness in Model 3 than this for sure, but I do like that you can open this. And I think a lot of EVs maybe need to set themselves apart by doing something like this. What are your thoughts, Max?
Yeah, I'm just, it's interesting because on one hand, this is a very futuristic sedan. It's trying to be kind of with the times. It's an EV, it's trendy, and yet it's not doing that very trendy panoramic all glass thing. And maybe that's because Hyundai figures the buyer of a sedan wants a more traditional sunroof. They want to be able to vent it, which is fair enough. But if you want that more open feel, if you want, as we've seen, right, more cargo area in the trunk, it seems like they're pushing you towards IONIQ 5. This is like a very specific kind of buyer it seems like they're targeting with this.
Yeah, very targeted, and you really feel that throughout this whole car. It's just, I just got to say, this car is really not built for me. We'll talk a lot more when we get inside. The exterior, though, so far, I'm very blown away, to be honest, with how everything feels. Just coming here to the door handles, we'll spend a minute here. This is nearly a perfect implementation of door handles for a couple reasons. When it's locked, completely flat. They don't open and make this huge loud noise. Like Model S, I compare this to all the time. Every time you walk by the car with phone key, you hear this, and just the loudest door handles on the planet. These are perfect, and they make so much more sense to me other than Tesla, how you're going backwards. I like this implementation. They feel very nice. I will say this actuation feels a little flimsy to me. I think that could be slightly refined, but overall feels really, really good. And door experience, again, really nice shut. This blows the EQE out of the water. Max and I just did a video with the EQE SUV, the worst door handles on the market. It feels cheap, feels plasticky. This feels way more premium just playing with the doors. But Max, I want to touch on something interesting here on this A-pillar all the way around. Look at this interesting line that they've done here, basically including the door in this section. Not something you see a lot, and you really see it down here. So this is a little odd to me how this entire door is basically one frame all the way around. Like if you look at the Tesla over there, completely separate parts. Look behind you over here. See how this door is basically from the belt line down one piece? Really weird what they're doing here. This seems like it would be very, very challenging for them to manufacture. I can imagine if you're replacing panels, it's not a cheap panel to use or to replace, and really just looks off to me. And I'm not sure exactly what the purpose is. I just, aesthetically, I guess maybe they had to, because the roof is so much lower, kind of get this slightly higher. I'm not exactly sure, but nonetheless, really interesting. All of these lines around here look absolutely precise. I don't even think we mentioned this car is a press car, so do keep that in mind throughout this review. This is not a delivered vehicle to a customer, so it should be gone through, but we've definitely seen on this channel that is not the case for all cars. So again, doors here, very sleek and absolutely perfect shut lines. I'm just like honestly blown away with how much nicer this looks over Model 3 on shut lines. Now moving up here to the front, I gotta say, I really like the front end of this car. Completely different from the back. It's weird with this car, and you don't say this about a lot of cars. It feels to me like this car should be cut in half and be two separate cars. Like the design language up front to me doesn't match the rear end. It's my personal opinion, but I really, really like the front end of this. A very pronounced look. I like down here how you have open aero vents. Max, talk a little bit more on those and how they operate.
Yeah, it's a really cool feature. There's this misconception that electric cars don't need any cooling, which is just not true. Batteries and other components need cooling. So when you are, let's say, driving it like Kyle might up at Canyon Road, and it needs to open them to reveal the radiators, it will do that. But normally driving down the highway for efficiency, it's doing what we see right now where they're closed, they're flush with the front, and it makes a really clean, just nice look, and it's functional too.
Yeah, very slippery and functional. I think that's really, really cool. So again, they're really taking that design language of, okay, we're trying to make a very slippery vehicle and integrate it into that. I think that's a really, really cool feature there. Now, hood is very interesting here. Max pointed out to me over here, he's like, when I looked at this, I was like, okay, something feels really off. But this is very intentional. If you follow this line down, it actually has this impression up here on the headlight. So you can tell this is actually meant to be like that. Like basically a muscular side here. Looks definitely odd, I would say. It doesn't feel like, okay, this feels really tight, but this is definitely intentional. So I don't think you can kind of bash them on how this looks necessarily. But yeah, really interesting stuff going on here. All of the shut lines here look absolutely perfect. Look at this fender to door alignment here. Like that is so precise. This to me is nearly as precise as that car sitting behind there, which is double the price, if not even, like you can get one of those, you know, basically 200 plus grand. So very, very impressive what I'm seeing here on the exterior. Let's talk a little bit more up front here, Max. So really interesting headlights. Again, pixel design coming up here. We've also got more pixels up here. I really, really like this badge here. This is so neat. It's basically like impressed, I don't know if you can see that here, into the actual bumper, and it's really nice material. That feels extremely, extremely nice. Down here, again, more active aero vents. This is going to be pushing air around the wheel. Now, I don't personally think these wheels are the prettiest. Speaking of wheels, they're fine. The aero wheels are pretty ugly as well. Again, this car is not really, I'm not getting the vibe that they really necessarily care about the exterior aesthetics. It's just like, okay, we're going to make a very, very efficient car here. So that's really interesting. Again, more pixels here. We've also got cameras around here. We'll talk a little bit about those once we get inside. But I got to say, Max, my overall impression, exterior fit and finish, they knocked it out of the park. Now again, press vehicle here. So if you do go to the dealership, your car may be slightly different, but this is really what I've come to expect from Hyundai, Kia, and vehicles like that. Like they really care about how these cars are put together. So exterior, very good. I'll tell you just a spoiler alert. Interior, I am not impressed at all with. So let's jump inside and talk about the interior. So jumping in here, again, really like this door feel. Feels premium when you open it, and then you look at the inside. I'm blown away with this car. So I have not spent much time with this car at all. My initial impression, just for all of you, feels so econobox. This thing to me does not feel premium whatsoever. The materials, every single place you touch, you're just like, God, I think they spec'd the lowest and cheapest plastic they absolutely could have. So let's just start here on the door panel. Really wild design. You'll notice very little buttons, no mirror switches, no window switches. And they did that for this to have, I guess, some storage area here, make it look aesthetically clean, if you will. I think it's a horrible implementation of this because then the center console, you start losing storage space and things like that. Just, I don't know. I guess it is kind of cool to have all of that right there at your right hand, but man, this door panel looks so plain to me. And then you start touching things and it just goes really, really downhill from here. That is not a good 56,000, well, I guess this is what, 57, 58,000 with destination fee. This material needs to be so much nicer. This is a scratchy, cheap plastic. You do have some really cool ribbing here, almost looking like we do have ambient lights back here. So I guess the aesthetics look fine, and then you touch it and it's just this very plasticky meh material here. You've also got some soft touch, very plasticky, like this feels so cheap here. Really unimpressed with that. Down here, again, more hard plastic, very cheap hard plastic. Like just look in the cup holder here. Like this thing to me literally looks like a $20,000 car as far as materials inside. I am just like blown away. Like seriously, I expected to jump in the interior and go, oh my God, I understand why somebody would get this over a Model 3. It feels so much nicer, so much quieter. It is quieter, but man, the materials really let this car down. And Max was telling me, that even if you get really the lowest trim, you're not getting nicer materials. This being the Mac Daddy, this feels like the base model to me. It really does. You can get cloth seats in this, which is like blows my mind in the day of, you know, vegan leather and nice materials like Tesla seats. I'm just thinking about like a base rear wheel drive Model 3 interior compared to this is just as nice. It's less expensive, whereas you have to get cloth. The Bose sounds terrible in this, Max. Don't you agree?
Yep.
Like just some interesting design choices that went on here, but the plastics are so bad. So Max, I'm gonna have you jump over to the passenger side and we'll talk about like the overall layout here. So let me jump in the car while Max does as well. And Max, I have a huge problem here.
Yeah.
My head is basically in the headliner. If I look over here, my head is literally touching. This is as low as the seat can go. Now, I'm a big dude. I understand that. But this feels like I'm driving a school bus in a car that should feel like I can sit the seat on the ground and like really drive this thing around. It's like they tried to make an SUV out of a sedan. And it's like, I don't know what it is, but it just feels so weird. And then just first off, sitting here, we have our shifter here. Look where my knee is. Literally to go from the gas pedal to the brake, I'm touching it. This is as low as the seat goes. I'm just like blown away with this. My eye level is basically right here. I'm nearly like looking at the visor. I'm just shocked, to be honest. And I think this, you're gonna hear me talk a lot about this. If you're looking at a Hyundai product, just get the IONIQ 5. The thing charges well, it looks a heck of a lot better, and you have more space. Now, I think a lot of people are gonna go, okay, well, we've got a lot more range in this car, right, Max? But these cars charge so incredibly well that it's like, take the range hit, get a better looking car with more space, more practicality, and then just charge up for 4 or 5 minutes longer. You know what I mean? So I think this car is very odd in my impression. Max, give me your thoughts on the interior so far though.
Yeah, I think the interior, you know, I can't speak as much to the build quality as you did, but I agree with you that a lot of the materials are cheap. I do think that overall, this does speak to someone who an IONIQ 5 isn't for. There are some buyers who want a sedan. There are some people, Coleton, who are going to like sitting very reclined back,
Sure.
Embracing the kind of, you know, raked nature and profile of the sedan. I'm thinking of like highway commuters, right? Where maybe
Sure.
that range does matter to you. Because let's say you have a really long commute to your work every day. You want a comfortable place to be, just like the IONIQ 5. This has a really good driving assistance system, HDA2 in this, meaning like lane changes and all that are really comfortable. You combine that with an interior that's really quiet. I think if you're not like a, you know, driving enthusiast, like if you are, just look at Polestar or Tesla. Don't look here. And if you need the practicality, look at IONIQ 5. But if you're neither of those things, this actually, I think, does work for some people.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I do think there's a few positives on the interior. It is very quiet. It is substantially quieter than your Polestar 2, than my Model 3. That's no doubt. I think it rides very interesting. I told you I thought it rode a little bit firm. That may be the bigger 20s that this is sitting on. I think if maybe you spec the aero wheels, which I don't think you can do on the top trim, would maybe make the car feel a little bit softer, a little bit more dampened. I do like over IONIQ 5 that you actually have a center console area here. That's always been one of my biggest gripes. I like a cockpit feel in a car, and like how Rivian basically has this cut out, I really don't like. This is a better implementation. It's this really interesting floating shelf here, Max, so you have so much space down here. Like, I don't even know what you could fit down here. Probably like 20 Stanleys, you know, those huge things that all the ladies are carrying around right now.
Yeah.
You could put a ton of those down here. Like, there's so much space. But then you start touching everything, and again, you feel so much cheap plastic. Here, more cheap plastic. It's just, everything is hard. And it's like, why is this all not soft touch? This to me looks like it's out of basically a $15,000 car, like not a premium material at all, not particularly soft. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just very surprised. Also weird that we have Type A here and Type C in the armrest. That's really odd.
Here's what's also odd, Colton, and bugs me as a tech person. To use CarPlay in this, you got to use that Type A port. Now what we have iPhones,
my
everything
gosh.
on USB-C, and yet you need this weird cable to use CarPlay or Android Auto.
Yeah, definitely. And then you have your phone holder here. Actually, this makes a lot more sense. This is a nice grippy area here. I would be surprised, give it the old Kyle test, put your phone here. I'm sure he could get this phone to fly out, of course, but like my Model 3, you're like just putzing around town, go around the corner, your phone's flying out of there. So I never really use this. So I'd be curious to see how that does. But yeah, again, just to me overall, my impression is I think the interior looks completely fine. Like to me, it's not revolutionary. It's not insanely nice looking compared to other vehicles. But like you just touch everything and it just feels, man, I don't know what it is. Like just everything. The dash up here is all this very cheap, like hard knocking plastic. Like I'm shocked, to be honest, Max. Like I literally told you that when I drove this car this morning. I was like, I cannot believe how much cheaper this interior feels than something like your Polestar, than something like the Model 3. Yeah.
I'll say it's practical. Compared to my Polestar, you can really tell that that was developed on a gas platform or a shared platform, whereas this is much more like the Tesla interior, where you may disagree with the materials they use and the exact design decisions they made, but you can tell, wow, they're flexing the fact that it's an EV, that they have all this storage space. And unlike a Tesla, Colton, if you put your foot on the brake and turn it on, right, you have physical climate controls. Now, I'll say I don't actually like these that much because I don't see the huge advantage over a touchscreen. There's no feedback on these buttons. Okay, they're in the same place each time, but similar story with Tesla. I do like it better than IONIQ 5 though, because it doesn't do that thing where you only have volume or up and down, like where that toggles. If people have seen that vehicle, whereas this you always have those discrete functions. That's kind of nice.
Yep. I think hard buttons are good for a lot of people. I think like Tesla, how they do a center screen and that's all you have is a big downside for a lot of people. So like, yes, I think this is a better implementation for most. Now, these buttons, I will say, the buttons feel completely fine. Like this, nice clicky scroll wheel. Like it is a little plasticky, but that feels great. Here we have this really nice knurled finished volume rocker here. That feels nice. Up and down switch feels very nice. You have your regen pedals here, nice and clicky responsive action. These all feel like they've got a nice cushion to them. As they're, oh, hello. Okay. As we're making a bunch of noises here, but like the buttons feel good. This feels completely fine, but it's just like all the other stuff to me feels very weird. I also mentioned to Max, I feel like the steering wheel is upside down. I feel like this makes more sense with how this kind of swoops in here. I don't know, just looking at it is really odd. You do have some pixels that light up here, and I'm sure, Max, you said that these light up at different circumstances?
Different functions, like for instance, the ultrasonics when you're parking, they'll flash red when you're close to something.
Cool, very cool. And this does that really fun thing where you're backing up and then all of a sudden it jams on the brakes when you think you just hit something, even though you're 5 feet away. Our ID4 does that. I absolutely hate that type of stuff. But again, driver assistance stuff is great, but it's just like, it's so frustrating sometimes. So yeah, the interior I'm just shocked with. I'm shocked at the seating position. Like literally, if I put my head over here, my head is literally into it. The seat is as low as it can go. The ergonomics of this here, there's people with way longer legs than me. Now I do have a lot of cushioning because I'm a heavier set dude here, but like this to me is so impractical. I would just basically never drive this car because it's so uncomfortable for me to sit in. Also, Max, talk about these wing mirrors here, or this wing shape, I guess we have.
Yeah, in global markets, basically, right, like Europe or Korea, places outside of the US, these are actually a screen that are linked to a camera on the outside because they don't need to have physical mirrors. In the US, since we have to have mirrors, I guess Hyundai figured, even on the nicest ones for cost saving, no need for the camera and screen, so these are just blank, which I think is disappointing, because I think in a world where, that's legal in the US, and you have that I think that totally justifies having these in the interior.
Sure.
It's a cool look, but when they don't do anything, it's just extra detail for no reason.
And again, more cheap plastic there. Like just I'm very, very, very disappointed with the material choices they made. When you were pricing this car above something like a Model 3, like benchmarking a Model 3 interior, the Model 3 interior to me just feels way nicer, like way nicer. And it's just when you start touching things. Now, the Model 3 interior, of course, is not to everybody's aesthetic. Again, you have really nice buttons here that you can actually use, but like, I don't know, just the materials make this thing really fall apart for me. The other thing that makes this interior fall apart for me is the UI. I personally hate the aesthetics of it. It looks so cheap and like so unresponsive. Every single thing you click. Like this literally looks like something out of a 2008, I don't even know, like a GM car. Like it's just, we're in 2023 where basically you have a super computer in your pocket, and this is as good as projection as we can have on a brand new bleeding edge technology EV. This to me just needs to be way nicer, especially aesthetically. I really hate how this is just so bright white and cut out. It looks very cheap, not implemented very well. Like when you compare this to the Tesla screen, again, or even your Polestar, Max, your Polestar has this really nice integrated area here. You can put Google Maps in here. You have a really nice screen here that feels integrated and part of the car, where this just feels like it's slapped on the dash. So huge negative for that for me. My personal opinion is interior and aesthetics of this car just absolutely kill it. So I think lastly, let's jump in the back seat because there's more to talk about there. Similar things going on back here, more cheap materials. Again, back here, we have all of this really hard plastic back here. These are a little bit softer, which basically once the door closes, this is part of like your almost side bolster here. Really interesting. Armrest area here, very cheap, very cheap, very cheap. Just not impressed with the materials here. What I'm also not impressed with is when you get back here, as you saw, I just hit my head on this, I have zero headroom. My head is literally completely resting on the roof here. But what I do have, tons and tons of legroom. Really interesting here. Even if I scoot back to where my knees are basically in the seat, my head is still touching the sunroof or the roof up here. Now, Max, we talked a little bit about the sunroof earlier. If this had a full panel roof, man, I would think this would really solve this issue. And I'm very surprised this is still the case. Why don't you switch with me back here? And you can sit in the back because you're a little bit taller, but definitely not as fluffy, if you will.
Yeah, similar thing, but just with the height, I don't feel like I have comfortable headroom. I really have to like recline to more than this seat can actually recline.
Right.
And it's great that I have all this foot room. I love that this is a flat loading floor. You know, I could dream of this in my Polestar. For Tesla owners, this is nothing new. But I think the distinction between this and a Model 3 is, wow, they showcase how much legroom there is. It's just seating wise, because I have a taller torso, I'm uncomfortable.
I'm also looking, like you have pretty long legs there, but looking at how your legs are sitting with how high that floor is, man, I just don't think this would be a comfortable car to sit in for more than 45 minutes or an hour. And I think, again, I'm kind of getting to this feeling of this car to me is kind of a miss. It just to me kind of seems like, okay, why not just grab the Hyundai IONIQ 5, have slightly less range, have the amazing charging experience that these cars have, and have a little bit more practical car. So to me, I really don't understand this car, to be honest with you, Max.
All right, Colton, that's a look at the build quality. And, you know, I agree with a lot of what you said. This car is so confusing in so many ways. I do want to add one more point here before we hear your final thoughts. I think what's interesting about something like this is, one, it obviously is a radical departure from like a Model 3, which at this point, because of the price, because of an insane value, we see so many of those on the road. This, I mean, I think you were telling me earlier, your wife said this car like looked hideous. She had no idea what it was, but like, you know, whether you like it or not, you notice it, right? She's not a car person, and she saw it and she was like, look at that. And so if you're one of the people who likes this design, wow, it looks distinctive. And IONIQ 5s even, we're seeing a lot of those on the road. I mean, basically, I think Hyundai with their early electric models here is really just trying to showcase their uniqueness, their distinction, their design chops. And what they've done here is, right, in the name of functional aerodynamics and I guess sedan lovers who like this futuristic aesthetic, it's not going to be everyone. I don't mind it. I think it's kind of cool, but it's totally a taste thing.
Sure. To me, and I think this is like the bigger picture, when you're charging a more premium price than something like a Tesla Model 3 performance variant even. I think this car more accurately represents the long range variant of the Tesla Model 3. It should be nicer. The build quality on the outside 100% is nicer than Tesla. But when you get inside this car, this does not even come close to feeling like a $57,000 car. I'm sorry, it just does not. This to me feels like a $30,000 Econobox inside at the very best. Like I'm so unbelievably unblown away with the interior that I think I would forgive the aesthetics if the interior was just rocking. If it was like, man, this thing is just incredible, like really unique pieces inside. But to me, the materials just absolutely kill this car. And I'm surprised, Max, because when you compare this to EV6 GT, which is, yes, a different version of this car, same platform, a little bit spicier, more like race car-y focused. The interior is 10 times better than this. And I'm having a hard time understanding this car, I think is the biggest principle. It's like, okay, there's not much headroom in it. Yes, it has a lot of range, but like you're giving up all of these practical features that the IONIQ 5 has, and the IONIQ 5 looks way better in my opinion. Now we haven't done a build quality review on that, so I do want to do that because there are certain material things inside that I'm betting are very similar to this. So I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss for words for this car. I really wanted to like this car, but man, I just really don't. So thanks for joining us on another out of spec detailing video. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.